If you've got a phone microphone and you aren't afraid to embarrass yourself, you can pretty much recreate any bird sound that you want from scratch. I'll show you how right now. In this video, we're going to be creating a full bed of ambient sounds for our fishing game. Okay, so to recreate this sound ourselves, we need to perform this bird chirp literally by whistling and making vocal sounds into the voice memos app, but there's an obvious problem here. The chirp is way too high-pitched and fast to whistle at the same speed that the bird does, and that's where this little technique comes in. Let's lower the bird sound by 3 octaves, so almost 10 times slower than its original speed, and take a listen to it now. This sounds more like something that we can try to record. Again, this technique only works if you're a little bit of a maniac and you make these sounds as accurately as you can with your voice. So what you're about to hear is the slow motion bird sound in the left speaker, and then me in my closet with the door closed, making these sounds as accurately as I can into my phone voice memos app on the right speaker. So this is me and the bird at the same time. If you have neighbors who can hear you through the walls, God bless, just take your chances with this one. Once we have this matching as closely as we can, all we have to do is pitch our phone recording up by 3 octaves. That's the same amount that we pitched the original bird sound down. And now we have this, our recreation of this bird sound. This technique works great for recreating birds and other animals, but the real fun is just making up your own animal calls. You don't have to mimic something else. You can just start from scratch and make up a random new bird call, which would be great if you were doing sound design for like an alien planet or something. One other little trick is that birds tend to sound more rare and exotic if you pitch them down. So this bird sounds pretty normal at regular speed. But pitch it down just a little bit and suddenly it fits right in like an alien jungle type of vibe. These tips are all useful for birds and creatures, but you can't just make ambiences for a game with bird sounds, of course. We need wind and water and all the rest if we want the ambience in our game to sound welcoming and relaxing to the player. And right now, things are feeling quite empty. Since my last video, I deleted most of the art that I had in Bokeh because the temptation to design little islands and trees was overpowering, and none of that stuff matters unless there's actual gameplay. So in the last couple months, I've added 100 fish to the game, made a very crude mock-up of the actual fishing minigame itself. I made an inventory system with all the bells and whistles, so recycle, sort inventory, splitting stacks, combining, etc. I also made a kind of global player interaction system and a bunch of other small things. But most importantly, I worked up a secret document for my plans around what I want the overall design of this game to be in the future and what my plans are. I'm going to keep that more to myself for now, though, because I think a lot of that's going to change in the coming months, I'm sure. I'm ready to take a little break from the gameplay systems and do some audio work. Some nice ambiences to listen to will make testing the gameplay much more fun, so let's start from the ground up. What kind of ambient sounds would you expect to hear in a fishing game like this? I'm speaking in a very general sense. What are the big categories of sounds that we'll pretty much be hearing all the time? I'd say birds, wind, waves and water, insects, and foliage. We're going to handle these categories of sounds very differently based on what's directional and what's non-directional. In other words, some of these sounds will come from a specific location within the world, like the birds, and some of the sounds, like the wind gusts, will happen everywhere at once in 2D. It's important that we have a good mix of both directional and non-directional ambiences in the game, because if we made everything directional, the world might sound kind of overwhelming and fatiguing, but if everything was 2D, then things would sound flat and boring. So let's tackle the non-directional stuff first to build up a solid foundation. The wind layer is going to be a great glue to stick the rest of the ambiences on. And before we even dive in trying to look for real wind sounds, I'm actually just going to start with pure noise. You might wonder, why would you ever want to add noise to a game? Isn't static noise just annoying? And you're right, yeah, at high volume noise is super annoying. But at a lower volume with a filter on, it can actually be extremely pleasant and calming. Noise also comes with another major benefit. It contains no distinct sound sources. No bird sounds, no wind, nothing. It's completely consistent and predictable, which is great because we're adding those other sounds later, and we want total control of when they play and what they sound like. But we can't just put pure noise into the project. How do you take annoying pink noise and make it sound beautiful and like the beach? First, we have to find a reference recording of the beach that has the feel that we're looking for. I found this one that I like a lot. Then we're going to scan this sound and capture a sort of snapshot of all the frequencies that appear and how loud they are. You can see this is what the spectrum of the sound ends up looking like. Next, we're going to take that spectrum information and apply it to our noise loop as an EQ effect, essentially keeping the consistency of the noise but giving it the feel of a recording of the beach. That takes us from this pure noise loop to this. It's kind of funny if you close your eyes and just listen to the new noise loop softly, it actually does kind of sound like you're at the beach, even though we completely stole that feeling from another sound. It's totally fake. We're just listening to the noise with a filter on it. Now we've got the foundation layer of our wind, and we can add some more organic layers like the gusts on top of it. Boom Library was kind enough to send over the Quiet Planet collection for me to use in this video, and I'm having an absolute blast going through it. I used to have a license for these ambiences at my first game studio job, and I was always amazed at how versatile and beautiful they were. Now having them myself, I just feel like I have access to any outdoor environment I could ever need. They're very expensive though. It's not cheap, of course, to produce recordings like this, so I recommend if you want to dive in, buy one of the locations at a time and slowly build up a library of the most useful ambiences to you. Or even better, honestly, get out there and go record some stuff yourself. As we've shown time and time again on this channel, it does not take amazing gear and plugins to make great recordings. For the wind in this game, I'll be taking some sounds from the wind library from Quiet Planet. Here are a few examples. These wind sounds are awesome, but what do we do with them? We can't just make a big loop and expect it to sound good. We want a more dynamic world than that. We want the ambiences to never repeat themselves. Every time our player jumps in, we want to give them a completely unique audio experience. So how do we go about doing that? Well, we've got to build a script that behaves like a kind of instrument in our game. We need to spawn randomized sounds at random time intervals in a given location. But it can't just be for wind. It's got to be a system that works with all types of sounds, like birds and insects too. Let's break it down piece by piece. First, we need to be able to feed our instrument a group of sounds and two numbers, a minimum time and a maximum time. These two numbers represent the range of possible times between each new sound spawning. So in other words, if we've got a frequent sound, like raindrops or something, we can spawn them between every 0 and 0.1 seconds. But for something more infrequent, like wind gusts, maybe we'd only want them between every 5 and 10 seconds. When the instrument is told to play, we're going to pick a random sound from the group, pick a random number between the min and the max, wait that many seconds, play the sound, then rinse and repeat. With that simple implementation, we've already got most of our functionality. We have random wind sounds playing at random times. That's pretty good, but we can make this a lot more interesting. Let's add a bounding box for these sounds to play inside of. So now when we place this instrument in our game, we can decide how large it is, and now in addition to picking that random time and a random sound, we can also pick a random point inside the box. That will be the point that the sound plays from. So far this is great, but we're missing one more important thing. The box is kind of stuck in one place right now. We need the option to attach this box to the player so that we can make this ambient world that we're creating feel like it surrounds the player wherever they end up walking or sailing to. If you want to check out in more detail all of the other features I added to this instrument and learn how to make it yourself, join the Patreon for the hour-long lesson video on this episode. Now let's listen to the wind that we created. Here's what it sounds like in-game. Now that we have a nice bed of wind, let's layer in the more directional creature elements like birds, frogs, and insects. We can use the same exact script that we're using to scatter the wind sounds around the player, but just with different time intervals and of course different sounds. There's one thing to keep in mind though, if we play these sounds too loudly and too close to the player, they may feel like they need to go look for the bird or the insect that they're hearing, which could be pretty annoying because of course there is nothing to find. To avoid this problem, we can just run all the creature sounds through some filtering to take out the high frequencies, and also add some very slight reverb as well. I'm also going to add another option to the box that we're playing our sounds from. I'm going to add the ability to spawn sounds only on the surface of the box, not inside. This will guarantee that the sounds will always spawn at a certain distance from the player, again avoiding the player walking past a sound wondering why they couldn't see the bird that they were hearing. Here's what our animal layer sounds like with the wind. Now let's add some small wave sounds to the shoreline. Right away, the waves are going to be a little bit different from the birds and the wind because we want the wave sounds to play from a particular location on the island, not just following the character around. But when we turn off the follow player option, we've created a different problem for ourselves. What if we have huge shorelines in this game? What if the player stands over here relaxing for a few minutes, but all the wave sounds are randomly spawning over here? That doesn't work. In most AAA games, and I've done this many years ago, this is where you'd make a spline sound emitter. You'd take a long curved line called a spline in most engines. You'd find the closest point on that line to the player, and then update your sound's position to that location every, say, 1/10 of a second. But there's a problem with this too. This is a great place if you want to pause the video and try to think about why emitting a sound from the closest point on a curved line could potentially sound bad. I'll give you a second to do that now. If you'd rather just know, here's the answer. The answer has to do with panning. Watch what happens when I walk around this curved spline. At certain points, the sound snaps to a completely different location because I'm suddenly closer to that point on the line. This means that the sound would also be zipping around my head, bouncing from left to right, which would sound awful. It can be really tough to get audio to pan around the player nicely if you rely too heavily on splines. Most people just turn off spatialization entirely when using them, but I don't want to do that. If you're standing on the shore, I want you to be able to hear which direction the shore is coming from. So let's use our sound scatterer script, but now instead of picking a random point inside the box to play a sound from, let's add the option to pick the closest point inside the box to our character. That way, when a wave sound randomly plays on the shore, we can be sure that it's going to be at a relevant distance. Here's what our shoreline sounds like with this implementation. And last but not least, we've got the foliage sounds. In real life, of course, the wind is what makes the leaves rustle. A completely still tree doesn't make any sound, so let's make the wind control the leaves in our game too. What we can do here is set up an event system on our sound scatterer instruments. So whenever a sound gets randomly played, like a wind gust in this case, it can fire off an optional global event, which we'll call wind gust started. And then we can have the instrument itself also listen for events. So whenever a specified event is heard, for example, our leaf rustling sounds are going to be listening for the wind gust started, then it will play that sound for a certain duration and then turn it off again. The result is that whenever a wind gust starts, we'll tell the leaf rustling sounds to play for a couple seconds, and then we're going to stop them. Here's what this system sounds like. After all this, here's what our first pass on the ambiences feel like in our game. I've added a few other little details too if you want to try to listen for them and put your guesses in the comments. You can imagine so many other little details in the future that we could add. Like, for example, the wind could also send an event that makes the dock creak back and forth, or a wave sound hitting the boat could make the fishing rod and the tackle box shake around or something. There's so much potential. I think most people imagine when they're playing a game that ambiences are long looping sounds, but the only looping sound in this entire video was the noise loop at the beginning. The rest are short individual sounds just played randomly. Let me know in the comments what sounds you guys want me to make next for this game. Thanks so much for watching, and thank you so much to the patrons for supporting this channel. You guys know I appreciate it very much. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.